I'm thinking of ending things. We just talked about a fairly generic sort of like action Disney epic designed to appeal to as many people as possible. Well, now we're talking about a Charlie Kaufman film. He wrote and directed this new film that just came out on Netflix. It's based on a novel that came out in 2016 of the same name by Ian Reid. And this film stars Jesse Plemons, Jessie Buckley, so two Jessies, Toni Collette, and David Thewlis. And I'm not even going to try to explain or set up this movie. I think the honor is yours, Will. I know that you just read Charlie Kaufman's book. Probably a bigger fan of Kaufman in general than I am. I like a lot of his stuff. I don't think I liked Anomalisa nearly as much as you did, although I think it's a good film. And I'm a fan of this. I like Eternal Sunshine, and I like Adaptation, but I like Synecdoche, New York. I know some people really think that's like a huge old masterpiece, but yeah, we'll set the stage for us. What's this one about, and what do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, to clarify, I'm still working through Charlie Kaufman's book, Aunt Kind, but I did read Ian Reid's book this weekend, which is what the film is based on. And as far as the film itself, the plot, it's pretty simple at its core, or as far as the outline, I guess, is concerned, which is just basically like a youngish couple are visiting the boyfriend's parents, who live kind of in like the Midwest in this very kind of farmy house in the middle of nowhere. And we follow them as they're traveling to this place, and Jessie Buckley character is having some second thoughts about their relationship, wondering if it's really meant to last or if this is the moment where it should break. And as she goes to this house, she quickly realizes that things are just kind of off kilter. Things aren't quite right. Just in general, a lot of weird stuff's happening. A lot of abject things start to occur. And it serves as most Charlie Kaufman movies do, as a big like allegory for aging and dependency and our place in the world and things like that, which I imagine for a lot of people just kind of puts them in a funk and just kind of makes them question what the point is. For me, I love it. I love that stuff for Charlie Kaufman. Not that everything he's done has been like amazing or wonderful, but more often than not, I do really like his stuff, including on Anomalisa, which was my favorite movie of that year, 2015. And this is certainly one of my favorites for this year, but I'll let you share your thoughts first.
Well, yeah, I'm curious what you think, Abby, because I don't really know what kind of your background is with Kaufman, if you're a fan, if you're not a fan, what you are a fan of, and all of that fun stuff. And your expectations going into this, were you excited to see I'm thinking of ending things? Or were you kind of like me, where I was excited, but I was also like, oh man, this thing's going to mess me up, isn't it?
I was a little bit of both. I enjoy Charlie Kaufman, I think, more as a screenwriter than I do as a filmmaker. Somebody made an interesting point. I think it was Phil Iskov, who co-hosts the podcast Like It's 1999 podcast, that when other people direct Kaufman scripts, it's creative and interesting and curious. When he directs his own stuff, it can sometimes be depressing, bordering on just very, very sad. So I kind of went into it with some uncertainty, some mixed thoughts, but I really appreciated the film. I had a really hard time figuring out what it was really about while I was watching it, but it's one of those things that I think produces a lot more interesting thoughts and conversation about it after you've had some time to kind of mull it over. I, in particular, kind of was interested in the idea of how many of our thoughts and feelings, especially in relationship, are our own. I think Jessie Buckley's character at the beginning of the movie talks about like the ideas in movies kind of worming their way into your brain and living there. And I think we see a lot of that throughout the movie. Like there are entire stretches of dialogue that come directly from films, from film reviewers. Like there's a section where she just basically turns into Pauline Kael for about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, probably the scene of the year for me, at least.
Sorry?
I said probably the scene of the year for me, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great. And they don't say Pauline Kael, but you figure it out because you see there's a hint earlier. You see a book by her. And then when she starts doing the review, she like does like an impression. I was like, wait, that's
She has
So
a
it's
cigarette.
subtle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
fun.
And it's for me, like, I think super film nerds pick up on certain things. For me, there's a specific thing that she says about Gina Rowlands, which is directly from a Pauline Kael review, where you realize the entire thing is an actual review that has been put into a monologue, which I think is insane, but very specifically Charlie Kaufman. And I think when you contrast that with the way that she interacts with Jesse Plemons as parents, and their kind of varying personalities and their varying amounts of dependence on each other and on their son, Jake, I think there's a lot of questions there about how much of us is ourself and how much of it is what we depend on from other people and how much of it is the art and the things that we encounter in our lives that somehow kind of worm their way into our brains and end up defining us, which I think it's really, I think it's a fascinating take. And the most frequent thought that I had while I was watching it was that it felt like being in somebody else's brain, which is ironic because Charlie Kaufman also wrote Being John Malkovich, about a person who literally goes inside somebody else's brain. So there's all kinds of weird thought trails and wormholes that I had watching this that kind of collapsed in on each other.
Yeah, this movie does what really good allegorical films like Mother, for example, do, where it's open to a lot of interpretations without contradicting itself too much. I think that my favorite vein of this movie is reading it as Charlie Kaufman really does not like film critics. And I think in general, I really...
makes that very clear.
Right. Well, that's the thing is, like, he says something really interesting here. Like, this gets back into what I was talking about with Mulan, where it doesn't tell you anything new. It doesn't tell you anything you haven't heard before. This movie is actually pretty challenging. And this is, I know I'm comparing two movies that are not supposed to be compared, but just the idea that it's saying something along the lines of watching too many movies and consuming too much art turns you into like a replicant, into somebody who just regurgitates information without having any original ideas. I think that's a very scathing criticism, and it rings true in a lot of ways. I think it's a little unfair in some ways, but I really appreciate that he is trying to say something like this to the people he knows are going to watch this. I think not a lot of people are going to watch this on Netflix who are necessarily film critics or people who've read a lot of Wordsworth or people who are like coastal elites, I guess. I don't want to be pejorative about it. But there is this prevailing notion throughout the film that we don't have original thoughts. Everything is just like, if we really are in someone's brain, which I had that same idea, reading of it, Abby, then this is what it would be like, is everything is being filtered through things that already exist. Right. It's I think the movie Feels Good Man kind of gets into this, of where, memes, the original idea for a meme outside of the internet is everything is sort of a replication of something else. And Kaufman, the other vein of this is that it's almost like we're watching an assembly cut of a movie, because as it goes along, it's like we're watching all of his filmmaking decisions happen without anything being corrected. Like, names will change, colors will change, editing will change, somebody's job description will change from this to that, and then go back to it. It's sort of like he decided that, that is the creative process, is constantly changing things to appeal to other people instead of you just being fully creative. But it's funny how, like, you can look at this movie as a puzzle and be totally lost while you're watching. And I think most people will be like, what am I watching here? And then kind of like what you said, Abby, where afterward you'll start thinking about, okay, what did this mean? What did this mean? What did this mean? And in some ways, I wish you didn't have to do that as much. And I hope you can focus, people who watch this after listening to our conversation, I hope you can just focus on how you feel during the movie. I think that that's more important. And I think the existential dread in here, the whole, I think the most superficial reading of this film is, it feels like Jesse Plemons is like imagining what's going on. And we're in sort of like his sad life, and his regret and the relationships that didn't work out. And it's like he's trying to process all of it at the same time. Like, why did this happen to me? Why did she want to end things? Or why do my parents not love me? And it's kind of like a reversal of who the protagonist is in a lot of ways. And, I don't want to get too much into detail because of spoilers, but I just want to say, I think that the movie does work because all that stuff is effective enough. And then after the movie, it's like a treasure trove of being like, oh, maybe this means this and maybe this means that. And, that's what really clicked for me. But yeah, Will, I want to hear from you, a little bit more of how did you feel during this movie? And how are you feeling now?
Well, I want to talk about your one point, which is that I think even though I do think it's meant to be scathing as far as like our relationship to pop culture and the idea of acknowledging that like most people who consume art might inadvertently not have their own original thoughts. I think that's true throughout the film, but I also think the fact that his directing style, is so evocative of David Lynch throughout the film, that's even true. Down to like people's like, like they'll leave a room, then come back and like their bandage isn't where it was before and like different things like that. Like I felt like that was kind of like his way of acknowledging that like he's not necessarily above that. Like I felt like he was like aware of like, yeah, like, like I think this is a universal truth as far as like what we have, what our relationship to pop culture. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not fully above that. Like even in my own directorial style, like I'm mimicking other filmmakers. So it's like, I don't take that as fully like holier than thou necessarily. I don't know if that's necessarily what you were saying, but I think.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that he is being scathing on film critics in particular, but he's also doing it in a universal way. So it applies to everyone. And that's a fair point that he kind of proves out that it doesn't apply to him.
Right. Well, I think it just that helps to avoid being like too like smarmy or like being like too self-righteous, which I'm sure some people will say that and some have already have, I'm sure. But that's how I took it at least. But as far as the film itself, I do think it's true that like it is kind of intentionally very unnerving, very unsettling, and very bleak as far as its message. But for some reason, and I'm still processing why this is, but I found the movie weirdly very comforting in a way that I can't really fully explain right now. I think I need to watch it again to figure out why. But I think there is an acknowledgement of that sense of like aging and like knowing that like what your life is may not be within your grasp control, even if you do live out your best life. And I think for me, that makes it a parallel to Synecdoche, New York in many obvious ways. But I feel like that film is a lot more like fearful and kind of more like at awe and like terror about that aspect. Whereas this film is kind of like Kaufman acknowledging that again. And there is like a melancholy to it, but he's also like having fun with it and experimenting as a filmmaker. And I guess that's where I kind of push back against the idea that like Kaufman is a secondary filmmaker, even though I do think he's certainly the stronger screenwriter overall. I do think his directorial style here does showcase that like he is willing to be very experimental and weird and not abstract in a way that, I'm sure if Spike Jonze or Michel Gondry had directed this, they would have done as good or maybe even better job. I don't know. But I do think as a director, he really does step up here in a way that showcases that as far as his take on his material, he is willing to be like very, cerebral again, but in a way that is almost sometimes kind of playful and absurd and like acknowledging, like these very heady, deep ideas, but in a way that's like very cinematically rich. It also helps that the DP, I forget their name, but it was the person that did Cold War. So the movie looks gorgeous in a way that, it does make it depressing that most people, if not everybody, will be seeing this in their houses on Netflix as opposed to any intended theatrical release. But at the same time, I do really appreciate that Netflix will allow people to, like you said, allow them to like kind of really dive into the puzzle and like watch and rewatch and go back and like watch certain clips and like kind of dive into this film a little bit more in depth than they might have if they had to wait for an extended period of time for this to hit home video after a theatrical release. So I'm grateful and a little sad this is a Netflix film, but at the same time, I feel like only Netflix would allow Charlie Kaufman to do this. So overall, I'm grateful.
Yeah, because it has been a long time since his last film. So, and a lot of, there's always stretches for sure. So I think Anomalisa was like 7 years after.
5 years ago. 2015.
No, I'm saying Anomalisa was 7 years after Synecdoche, New York.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And this might be his last one for all I know. Who knows?
No, he's doing, he wrote Chaos Walking.
Right. As a director. Who knows if he'll get funding for his next film? I have no idea.
Who knows?
I feel like
he might co-direct again.
That. But yeah, that's true.
But all right, Abby, do you find this comforting?
That's an interesting take. I feel like there are some parts of it that are comforting, but comforting is an odd word to use.
I fully acknowledge that.
Yeah, I'd say in almost defeatist comforting kind of a sense. Like there are a few moments in the film that I think have kind of a comforting feel to them, but the kind of comforting where something goes really horribly for you and then somebody who is close to you and kind says, I know this was bad, life is hard, that's okay. So there's kind of a comfort in that. But it's I think it's surrounded by a lot of kind of mental flotsam and jetsam that I think is kind of unnerving, but also the fact that it's so recognizable, I think also maybe makes it a little bit comforting as well, that like everybody's brain really is that jumbled inside. And there is kind of a universal existential fear of how many of my thoughts are my own. Who am I? What is my identity in the middle of all of this? So in a way, it's kind of nice to have that sense of like, we're all kind of dealing with the same thing, even if the thing that we're dealing with is really hard, which I think could be the human experience. It could be like right now where everything feels the same and repeated, but also kind of different and strange.
All right. This is one of those rare times where I'm more excited about final thoughts and grades because I don't know what's about to happen. Because I'm very split on how I would recommend this film. I think that it's a must-watch for Cinemaholics. Like if you watch a lot of movies, if you do follow a lot of film criticism, and I know a lot of our listeners do, right? They listen to the show and they like to engage a lot with film reviews. I think that they will appreciate this a lot. I think that you can watch this, and even if it doesn't fully emotionally resonate, I think that it's a worthwhile experience. And I think that it's technically a well-made movie, and Jessie Buckley is just a performer. I think that I'm shocked she's not already an A-lister, but she's getting there for sure. She's an indie darling at this point.
We haven't said enough about her performance, which I thought was great.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the only weakness is that I think that the first 20 or 30 minutes really amplify what's so great for her as a performer. But then I think eventually the movie gets away from her. Not her as a performer, that she does anything wrong, but I think the writing shifts away from her. And I don't know exactly how I feel about that, because I do really like Jesse Plemons. I think he's also, not just an indie darling, but he's certainly somebody who has really earned a place in being a recognizable and reliable, consistently good actor. But the decision to sort of like shift the focus over to him, it's risky. And I think that, Kaufman is somebody that I appreciate for his bold risks. And so on that sense, I'm between a B plus and an A minus. I feel like if I give it the A minus, it's like I'm saying, everybody go watch this. This is something that everyone's going to appreciate. That's not really the case. I think this does have a limited appeal. So I'm kind of at a really, really high B plus. But I want to say A minus just in the sense that maybe it's because we haven't seen a lot of good films lately, like really, really good films, that I want to hype this one up a little bit more. But I think where I'm at right now is a very high B plus. You will probably get a lot out of this. I just don't think that everyone's going to really love it. And I don't think it's stronger than a lot of Kaufman's other work, especially the ones that he wrote and did not direct. I think it's kind of where I was at with Anomalisa, except slightly a little bit better. But even though I have come to appreciate that film more over time, I don't think I loved it nearly as much as a lot of other people did in 2015. But all right, Will Ashton, what about you? This is a hard movie to put a grade on for sure, but if you had to.
Sure. I mean, I will say that the one thing I really like about Kaufman as far as a writer is that I think, especially like with adaptation, this, like, he recognizes that he could just, retell the story or do something, like in that vein. But like he takes the story here, which is by extension as a book, kind of a simple story. Like it's a pretty cut and dry story as far as the Ian Reid's take of it. And he expands upon a way that gives it its own identity and still keeps the core ideas of the book there, but allows it to flourish in his own individual style. And I think that it's something as far as like being a huge film fan that I really appreciate. And I think that's something that he really excels at here. And I mean, I'm a little biased because Kaufman's a big fan. I'm a big fan of Charlie Kaufman. I just love his style. I think he's a fun filmmaker in my sense. I know fun's probably a weird word to use for him, but I really like his stuff. I would say I agree with you that I don't think this is like a top 5 film for him. Like I would definitely put like Adaptation, Being John Malkovich, and Eternal Sunshine, and Anomalisa, I'd say even above this. But as far as like his style, I mean, it's definitely head and shoulders above most of the films I see this year, and I will end up seeing this year probably, unless the last quarter is really going to knock my socks off. But considering that we don't even know what's going to come out, I don't know if that's going to be the case. So for me, I'll give it a low A-. When I was watching, I think it was closer to a high B+, but just the fact that it does reward you with thinking about it and really contextualizing it and stuff, I think that's what makes it worthy of the low A. So pretty easy A- for me.
All right. And Abby Olchesi, where are you at? I'm very curious if you're going to be closer to me, Will, or somewhere else.
I think I'm closer to Will on this one. I think there are some films that work more like, I mean, film is an art form, obviously, but I think there are some movies that work better when you consider them as modern art than you consider them as just a movie. I feel like Charlie Kaufman often fits into that category, and I feel like this movie especially fits in that category. So I would give it an A- in terms of like it's not necessarily for everybody, but not every piece of art is for everybody, and I think that this is definitely art. This is somebody trying to express their feelings and opinions in a kind of abstract and impressionistic way, which I think fits my definition of that term. And so different people are going to engage with it in different ways. And I feel like that is kind of the point. So in that sense, I think it's pretty successful.
All right. That is an A- average for I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It's available on Netflix right now. Definitely comes highly recommended by all three of us.